Technical College and has an enrollment of 72,000 students and 4 campuses. Dr. Stokes is responsible for all collegiate level academic programs. He attended in PhD, dissertation in counseling, and sorry, I'm having a little trouble reading this right now, and organizational development at Kent State University, where he did all of his higher educational experiences. Also an MA in sociology and anthropology, master's in educational rehabilitation psychology, a BA in biological science services and psychology. He is married, and he's a proud father of 2 children, Stacy and Robert, and a very proud grandfather. At this time, I give you Mr. Scully Stykes.
Thank you. I've been asked to speak to the idea of the development of the Milwaukee schools related to the education development of African-American males. Originally, Mr. Ken Holt, the co-chair of the committee that developed the proposal, was to speak, but because of an emergency, a financial emergency, and meeting called by the superintendent, he was unable to attend. I served as the consultant to the development of the proposal that I have before me that I will speak from, and a consultant to the development of the plan, and a writer of the initial proposal. So I want to begin at the beginning, the conceptual idea, and bring you up to date on the process and the implementation of the structural modifications in the school system, creation of the school and its development. In 1988, Ms. Joyce Mallory, school board member, Mr. Reuben Harpo, and I met to discuss the idea of the failures in the Milwaukee public school system. Let me give you an idea of what that means. Out of about 5,000 plus students in the high school, African-American males in Milwaukee, only 135 in 1989 had a B average or above. The average grade of high school students, that's 10th through 12th grade in Milwaukee, was 1.46 on the 4-point system. At that time, we believed something dramatic, something radical needed to be done. So Ms. Mallory, as a result of her position as a school board member, had persuaded the then superintendent, Dr. Robert Peterkin, who's now at Harvard, is no longer superintendent, to develop a task force to examine what needed to be done system-wide in Milwaukee to improve the education of African-American boys. Dr. Peterkin then asked me to serve as a consultant to deal specifically first with educating its teachers and propose models to improve the relationship of teachers to students and to change the nature of the classroom and to develop structures to teach teachers. I will talk about that model this afternoon and talk about and show the results of those teaching efforts. In this session, I'll describe my involvement in the structuring of the schools and where we are now in preparing for the schools to open this September. Early in 1989, a school board resolution was passed, proposed by Ms. Mallory. What she proposed was that the district began to look at and examine ways in which the schools need to be improved to deal specifically with the plight of African-American males. At its meeting on February the 22nd, the board referred the following resolution. Whereas African-American males' progress in schools appears to be equal to that of their peers during the preschool and primary years, and whereas subsequent to the primary years of school, African-American males' academic progress becomes more depressed than their peers. And whereas this lag in academic progress presages a disproportionate increase in African-American males being suspended, dropping out, and are being referred for exceptional education or alternative school placement. And whereas these schools-related problems form the basis for the disproportionate number of African-American males who become incarcerated, unemployed, or underemployed in adult life, therefore be it resolved that the superintendent appoint a task force to review all programs dealing with the education of African-American male youth and report to his office and the board of school directors on steps that could be taken to improve these programs and on innovative methods that could be initiated in the district. So our initial conceptualization was not just to develop an alternative school plan for African-American males in Milwaukee. In fact, the recommendation to originally develop the three schools at the elementary, middle, and high school level was only one of 28 original recommendations. And we're not only proceeding with the implementation of the schools, but with all 28 recommendations. Because the essential problems of African-American males in this society must be placed in the context of the society itself, and educational institutions are only one part of that society. Our initial idea was to look at the reasons for the failures of African-American boys and men. And the reasons don't reside in ourselves alone. We're not looking to blame the victims for our problems. The problems were very aptly described by our morning speaker, Congresswoman Holmes, and we know them well. The institutional pattern of dealing with us has been oppressive, that structures in illegitimate ways to achieve legitimate ends. So we wanted to deal with the context of what was happening in Wisconsin and particularly Milwaukee, and structure ways to intervene to prevent the alternative responses of males in dropping out of school and turn that to be a positive response. We also wanted to look at the failures of the school system in incorporating a cultural component in school that was absent, as well as understanding the values, the sense of a lack of a locus of control, the lack of clear goals, restructuring relationships, developing adequate strategies and a curriculum that includes us, and adequate resources to take everything in context. So our conceptualization has never been that African-American male schools would be a solution to all of our problems, neither in Milwaukee nor nationwide, only a part of the issue. So our focus is the development of these schools right now at the elementary and middle school levels, because of the lack of resources as a result of the reduction in income, and eventually the transformation of the entire Milwaukee public school system to be inclusive of us. The failure of public education has been the failure to take us into account legitimately, authentically. All of us who have gone to school, public schools, if not a Black private school, know that hardly anything is addressed that is relevant to our cultural and personal experience. Not in content, not in process, not in value, nor meaning. So our efforts are to transform the meanings, transform the goals, share a different kind of power with African-American parents, community, the children themselves, and the teachers in the classroom, change the nature of the relationships, change the nature of the curriculum to make it Afrocentric, and change the nature of the context of the society that is defining what school is about. We wanted to develop a curriculum that goes back to the African origins of civilization and talk about the generation of knowledge and where it came from. So we looked and studied efforts of others and drew upon studies of Black and white scholars to define and restructure an Afrocentric curriculum. A large part of what we are using are what is called the Portland Essays, defined by the Portland school system in looking at the basis of knowledge from Africa in science and technology, humanities, music, and other disciplines, and building upon that to restructure a curriculum to define a direction for Milwaukee. It's important also, we wanted to examine areas of student achievement and self-esteem. Dr. Donald Leake, professor of education at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, conducted a study in a program called One-on-One, where we work with mentoring Black youth, and found that a lot of young boys had very positive perceptions of themselves, contrary to the popular opinion that we feel bad about ourselves. We wanted to focus on a strength to strengthen self-esteem. We also know and found that they lack cultural knowledge of themselves. There is a difference between having personal self-confidence and self-esteem and cultural self-confidence and self-esteem. So we are structuring in cultural knowledge and self-esteem and building upon a base of personal confidence and self-esteem. We're also structuring in not only family and caregiver, and that's important, not just family involvement, but caregiver involvement, because a lot of youngsters are nurtured in foster homes, single parent families, and different kinds of family structures. There are at least 5 different patterns of so-called, quote, family patterns in the African-American community. So we have to look at family and caregiver involvement and support in the school. So a necessary component of the Afrocentric schools are the involvement of parents. Secondly, the task force structured in the involvement of business partners in the school. And we have 2 very important business partners. Wisconsin Gas and Electric is involved and has contributed funds and staff and models. And North Milwaukee Bank, a Black bank in Milwaukee, has contributed funds and is involved in a mentoring program and Saturday and structured program, and also the Urban League. Putting these things together, we recognize that that still is not enough. The teachers and their response and relationship to youngsters, the expectations are critical in self-confidence development, are those activities that mitigate against self-confidence development and achievement, and academic achievement. So restructuring the entire perspective and attitudes of the complete teaching staff of the school was and is essential. So an effort has begun to change the nature of how teachers are prepared to deal with our boys. Teachers need not only the content of an Afrocentric perspective, but the relationship, process, and style to understand their own teaching style and the learning style of African-American youth that is largely sociocentric and person-centered rather than content-centered, that is emotion-laden, not just content-laden, and understand how to create teaching strategies that are pertinent to us rather than alienating to us. We have begun a process of training. We have a week-long training session and orientation for teachers that is going on right now, started Monday and will continue through Friday. But we began the process long before that. I teach a class called Educating Black Males, Theories, Methods, and Strategies that began 2 years ago. and I've had over 200 teachers in the Milwaukee Public School System who have taken that class. So we have a cadre of teachers looking at the whole perspective of authentically dealing with us, from understanding our African origins, family structures, the oppression of the American society, our personal attributes, personality development, the psychological development of Black people from infancy to death, our relationships and our meaning systems, and the strategies that relate to our human development that we're drawing upon. Because of the context of Milwaukee and what we knew we would run into in trying to propose an all-male, 100% Black male school, we never conceptually proposed the idea, even though it got out nationally that that was the case. From the beginning, in the Milwaukee mission statement was the statement that the schools were open to anyone. They are male-focused and they are Afrocentric. And we have encouraged African-American boys to attend. But as the school begins to open this fall, it is 50% male and female, because Black parents who elected to put their sons and daughters in the school perceived that females could benefit as much as males. And we have defined rites of passages for males and females, Saturday classes, uniforms to take the competitive dressing out of going to school. We have an Afrocentric curriculum that looks specifically at cultural attributes from the African continent, K through middle school, that we're working on, and transferring the curriculum in a way that addresses our needs that is strongly research-based. We are doing both an experimental study of the success or failures of the school, as well as case analysis and formative studies in following the schools over a 5-year period of time. We want to be scholarly. We want to replicate those things that are successful and transform the entire school system and change the entire curriculum of schools in Milwaukee, not just these Afrocentric schools. There are 95,000 students attending Milwaukee Public School System. About 26% of them are African-American males. The dropout rate from African-American males is about 60%. Over half the students suspended from schools, African-American males. We intend over time to change that around. We intend over time to create outstanding students from K through 12. And we recognize that this is a long process, and we're taking the long road, and we're taking the scholarly road, and we're taking an approach that we hope will be beneficial to Black parents and students in the long run, in looking at a problem that we perceive to be endemic to the nature of Milwaukee as a city and this nation as a whole. Milwaukee has one of the fastest growing crime rates in the nation, has the highest teenage pregnancy rate. It is one of the most segregated cities in the United States, and it has one of the most fastly deteriorating Black communities in this nation as a result of the deteriorating economy, manufacturing, and brewery economy that used to sustain all working class persons in Milwaukee. It has one of the fastest deteriorating family structures, Black and white, in the United States as a result of the declining economy in Milwaukee. So we recognize that the solutions are the interrelated workings of the city, the county, the industrial base in Milwaukee with the school system to share power in transforming a community, not just a school system. We will open this September with the K through 5 school in full force, and we're phasing in the middle school. We've had to delay the full implementation of the middle school because of the financial problems. We did not want to try to be complete and be evaluated with inadequate resources. We'd rather be patient and do it right than to do it wrong. And we put on hold the implementation of the high school because we felt that by the time a student gets to the 10th grade and all those years of socialization in a school system that hasn't legitimately taken you into an account makes it very difficult to transform attitudes, responses, and a culture of a school to make it truly Afrocentric. So as the middle school students move into high schools, we're going to begin to transform a high school and designate it for it. As we learn from K through 12, we'll implement the additional schools and change the entire school system. I'll be open to questions later. I'm pleased to speak to you. And if you would attend the afternoon session, I will speak specifically to how we're transforming and implementing the strategies and attitudes of the teachers in the school system to implement the schools. Thank you.
At this time, what I'd like to do is we're going to have a brief question period. Anyone that has a question, I'd like for them to come right up here, up front, and address the question to Dr. Skies. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Okay, if anyone else, just form a line behind him and we'll take the questions one at a time. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Stikes, I was wondering if you could elaborate on or give some specifics of the unique characteristics that make up a African American boy's learning style.
Okay, sure. A number of studies have been done to define what the African American learning style is and may be. One of them has identified that we pay particular attention to how things are done, not just what is done. For example, Black people in general will like and work with a teacher if they like the teacher, work around the teacher if they dislike the teacher, particularly if they think the teacher is biased, prejudiced, and unfair, and will not commit themselves to the content of the lesson without an adequate relationship with the teacher. And we've seen, observed, and studied that from kindergarten to college. And you hear comments like, I ain't going to class, I ain't gonna do this because teachers don't like me, without an understanding of a need to study the content regardless of the teacher, because the content is important for you to learn. Our style is centered around people. We're more people-centered than the majority of society. We're sociocentric, as I say. Also, we have a feeling style. We are much more emotional than analytical as a result of our cultural background. That's why we're more spiritual, we're more expressive, and we are more apt to say what's on our minds in appropriate time than the majority of society. We don't repress our feelings the way the dominant society does. So those are some of the elements. I could go on and on and on because this is what I deal with in my class. As a result of those elements, there are particular ways teachers can take advantage of that. The way schools are structured, they're structured against those attributes. Schools are content-centered and analytical and not people-centered. We are told to sit in our chairs behind somebody, look at the back of somebody's head, listen to people talk at you rather than to be involved in a personally identified relevant experience that we should learn from. What I'm teaching the teachers to do in Milwaukee is to be people-centered around a content to teach a child instead of teaching a book. Teachers go to school in an education college or division and learn to teach a content, not the child. The person is to be taught rather than to get through a content from page 1 to 20, a lesson. The lesson plan must be defined around the reason you're teaching a lesson, who is to be involved, how it should be delivered, what your goals are, the resources you need to get it, and the context of the school that you're teaching in. So all that must come together around the children themselves, you see? And when you have different kids, you need different methods to get at the content of the lesson.
Again, if you have a question, if you want to come right up here to the front and address it to the audience, just right up here to the front, sir, to be fair to the audience and to be fair to the staff. And again, I'd like to see a line form here if people have questions behind this gentleman, and then we can address them in that manner.
See, my name is David Hutton from Kansas City, Missouri, and I was just in the staff development last week in Kansas City. And I just want to make a statement that, could you say that African-American males are more global learners?
Yes,
That's what
absolutely. I didn't want to go through everything because, you know, I would be up here all day talking about all the elements. I just named a few. We're more global in perspective and eclectic in what we look at rather than analytical. The typical learning style of the majority of society is to be inductive or deductive, to go from particular to general or general to particular, looking at an issue. And we take everything into account and use more of our senses in making a judgment than the dominant society, because we have to pay attention to everything that relates to us, how people look at us, how they stand, how to respond, the cut of the eye, the distance they are from us, the tone of their voice, the word, all those things. We know as men, the unwritten messages that we have to pay attention to. And that's what I'm teaching the teachers to pay attention to in dealing with our youth. We know when brothers join each other, shucking and jiving and playing the dozen, and teachers can't often distinguish that and punish our youth for doing what's natural to them culturally. And they get into trouble and get suspended over things that are skillful play in our verbal jostling that doesn't mean what unknowing Black and many white teachers don't know.
I wonder if you would say a word about the sources from which you are drawing material for the Afro-centered curriculum. Are you developing it yourself, or are you finding it somewhere else?
Okay, you're getting me into my afternoon session, but I'll name some of the sources. The Portland essays developed through the guidance of Asa Hilliard are the disciplinary basis. You can get them by writing Milwaukee or writing the Portland school system. They provide the content and a process of structuring the lesson plans. We're taking them and modifying them and creating our own. The intellectual base that we come from are from a number of different sources. We have looked at the destruction of African civilization, Chancellor Williams, the African origins of civilization by Cheikh Anta Diop. We looked at the analysis of American history, the institutional patterns written by Mary Frances Berry and Blassingame that divide up American history institutionally and look at what has happened educationally here. We're looking at the writings of James Banks. We're looking at the writings of Chimamanda Ngozi. We studied the analysis of the other scholars who were working with me, my own book, Black Students in Higher Education, Dr. Donald Leake's study on self-concept development, Dr. Diane Pollitt's study on the development of African-American kids in Milwaukee. We looked at the gang studies done at the University of Wisconsin on Black youth gangs and why some youth are in gangs and some aren't. We looked at the Black family structures done nationally by the Urban League and locally in Milwaukee to ground the structure of what we're doing in sound data. This is the original proposal that we wrote. Because I am a stand-in speaker, I didn't bring 50. I only have about 3, and I promised both of them away. But you can get this by writing Milwaukee Public School System. and they will send it to you. This defines the intellectual base, our studies, gives all the statistics and all 28 recommendations that we're currently working on. It's called Educating African American Males, A Dream Deferred. And I titled it A Dream Deferred because of the poem by Langston Hughes. And let me just read that, and then I'll get to the next question. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or foster like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? I thought it was very appropriate for what is happening to us, because I see us exploding. Yes.
12 years ago, I was the president of the Board of Education, and I was screaming about social promotions. Do you think that this group should come out with some type of a resolution opposing the social promotion of our children? Because the dropout rates that you quoted of 60%, I have an article that was that I had written in a major newspaper in New Jersey, and the dropout rate was the same, 60% of our children dropping out of school. That's 10 years ago, so we haven't progressed at all. So do you feel that this organization should come out with a resolution condemning social promotions? That's the first question.
Well, I won't try to speak for the organization. That is certainly something that I think you should raise at the business meeting regarding the stance of the organization. Every Black organization needs to take a stance regarding the positive education of our kids, but I won't try to speak for what the organization should do. I think it's certainly something that you should bring up, that should be debated regarding what should be the outcome of this conference.
Another question, the National Honor Society has done more to mislead our people than any other group in the country. It's assumed that if you're in the National Honor Society, you're an A or B student, and that therefore, if you're an A student in Millburn, New Jersey, or an A student any place in the country or the world, it should be an A. So therefore, if you take an SAT test, an A student or a B student should get basically the same grade, be he black, green, blue, or white. Now, the thing is that the National Honor Society is a local honor society, and it goes by the local grading. Do you think that we should have a standardized grading system where an A is an A in any place in the world, or a D is a D any place in the world?
No, I don't. I believe in people locally defining their own standards and destinies. And as a psychologist, I don't believe in standardized testing because the method of testing is not conducive to development of achievement in anybody, really. And when you look at the correlation of standardized testing to education achievement in life, you don't find a high enough positive correlation to put that much emphasis on the placement of people based on the standardized test, particularly with us, because our style cannot be captured. Our intelligence, our meaning, our values, our achievement cannot be purely captured by a paper and pencil test, particularly a multiple choice one with limited choices, because of the nature of the creativity of responses in African-American children. I have to tell you this, a long time ago, I was testing a Black child in a discussion in a clinical psychology class I had. And on one of the intelligence tests that we were looking at, we were comparing and contrasting animals. And I was asking him, what's the similarity and difference between a giraffe, a horse, a chicken, and things like that? That was one of the items on the test. And he looked at me, and he had this puzzled look on his face. And finally, I guess he got enough courage to say, and I'm going to say it just the way he said it, but it was incorrect, but he was right. And what he said was, they all shit. Now, I had to mark him down as incorrect. That wasn't the correct response, but he was right. Now, is that child not intelligent? No. And I wanted to be graphic and say exactly what he said just to make a point. I apologize to anyone that was offended, but intelligence tests and testing and standardized testing locally and nationally can't capture the real performance and achievement of anybody. So I don't agree with testing, even though I function as a psychologist. standard tests as well as multidimensional ways of getting people to respond to situations as well as describe what they learn is the way to go. And there's a national movement to oppose standardized national grading systems and those kind of things.
Yes, sir. With the Black Boys School.
You just hold on for 1 second. We're going to take these 2 questions and then we'll end this session and break briefly and begin Dr. Kelly's session. Okay? Thank you.
Yes, sir. With the Black Boys School, are we saying that integration is not the answer now?
What we're saying in Milwaukee is that we have to deal with the context in which we find ourselves. There are 17 all-Black schools in Milwaukee out of about, I think, 95 schools. Now, the federal judge that helped define and structure the desegregation plan allowed those 17 schools to exist for about close to 20 years. So we said, well, is this integration? Is this desegregation as defined by the courts? These 17 schools are being run and managed the way they were when it was 85% white, without a change in mission and meaning, without a change in goals and focus and sharing power with the African American community, and without a change in content. We think that's absurd because it hasn't adjusted to the reality of the context. We're saying that the concept of integration must embrace something more than the transformation of the shifting bodies around. That's meaningless, shifting teachers and students. True integration is a new definition of a plural society. I don't know of situations in the country where there's true integration. True integration is also a sharing of power. True integration is developing flexible and enabling structures to educate us. True integration is the sharing of resources. That hasn't happened. As a result of the inadequate response and the maintenance of 17 all-Black schools and a depressed school district as a whole, we decided to deal with the reality of what we were facing. And what we're facing is the educational achievement of our kids needs to be accelerated. So we want to develop strengths based on things that we know work with ourselves. And we didn't build barriers to impede anybody from attending. We didn't build actual social barriers or legal barriers. We said we're going to redefine the missions of these schools from a position of strength, and we're going to focus them as many specialty schools are focused in Milwaukee. We have Spanish immersion, we have French, we have all kinds of cultural schools in Milwaukee. But the question was raised in the community, were we then proposing segregation? No one said we were proposing segregation when there were all Black schools that weren't Afrocentric. They were all Black schools that were white dominant in perspective. That's a double standard.
White people were teaching.
To us, and to me particularly, that's a false question. Most urban situations are predominantly Black. The issue is, can we make them authentically educational institutions that embrace everyone? To be Afrocentric is not to be just Black. To be Afrocentric is to go back to the original basis of humankind in Africa and look at the total human experience from the correct perspective, because the correct perspective is an African perspective. The first thing we have to deal with is the reality of race, that there's one race, and that everybody different from being Black is a variation on the original. That doesn't make us or them any better nor less, but the truth is the light of the world, and it must stand and set us all free. And we have been miseducated because of European perspectives being forced on the world, particularly since the 15th century. And the restructuring and the hiding of the knowledge that existed, that was a foundation of Greek and Roman society and later Western European and American society. So we want to go back and tell the truth and teach the history of knowledge in math and science and all the disciplines and where they came from out of Central Africa, Egypt, and Asia, Europe, to get beyond integration to authenticity.
Sir, I have an interest in the faculty, and I want to preface my remarks just briefly on the history of my life I'm sorry. I wanted to preface my remarks on some involvement in my own life when I expressed my concern about faculty. I was educated in an all-Black school. And the strange part of it is that the faculty members, with the exception of one, were all white. And I also stayed at the same school and finished seminary, and my faculty was all white without exception. Now, I said that so that I could ask you this question. During my college days in the all-Black situation, I was taught a great deal of personal esteem. The professors talked about academic excellency and how you should be competitive in this world. And I didn't think about the cultural esteem because they had not walked in my shoes,
Right.
Either in the seminary training or in the college training. And incidentally, it was Lincoln University where this happened, where the faculty was white and there is only one, I thought.
No, there's two.
I'm just joking. Lincoln University, Missouri, Pennsylvania was mine. My concern is that, I was wondering about the faculty because of this experience I had for a great deal of personal esteem, but very little cultural esteem because those persons who taught me had not walked in the shoes of my ancestors and the African American experience. So that's
I'll
my question.
address that issue. That has certainly been a hot issue in Milwaukee. The law and the union have really prevented the percentage of Black faculty that we have desired, and the number of males that we have desired, because a previously signed union agreement was adhered to and renegotiated. The faculty is only 33% Black. And the union actively resisted the change and then agreed to some tentative arrangements. In Milwaukee, only 17% of the complete teaching staff is African American across the whole school system. So the school will be almost twice as representative than the school system as a whole. We had originally proposed a much higher percentage than that. We recognize that white teachers can be effective in educating Black kids in content. We also recognize that they don't know the inside out emic cultural responses that Black people need, that you recognize in your experience. You need Black people to give the inside out cultural experience and identity, particularly Black males, to other Black males, because we know our own experiences, our own feelings that need to be shared with each other, with Black boys. That's why we are bringing in Black workers, fathers, brothers, mentors in the school during the week and on Saturdays. And we have rites of passage programs that specifically compensate for the cultural things that we think are critical to the social emotional development of our young boys. So you are right on target in dealing with the aspect of modeling and cultural identification that must come from Black people.
Again, we're going to break right now, and for
Okay. We can stop sharing the screen. And we don't really even have to talk about how far we've come since 1991 because we can't measure it. Because there are some children that are still so far behind and there is no catch up. But that's up to us. It's up to us to identify the inadequate services that are being provided to our children and raise a concern nationally, but locally here in Nevada. It's a personal responsibility. And you don't have to belong to the NAACP or the Black Chamber or any organization. Your obligation is to yourself and to our people as a personal responsibility to share your concerns with the governor, how we have not been allowed to the table, how we're not talking about the failed services for our children, how there is no evidence that the harbor actually works. And even though they've given us a smidgen of personal responsibility to take over the social and emotional needs of children who look like us, there are a lot of other organizations that get that money. And we're not getting it to control what happens to our children. So in 2021, the word is e-purpose. Out of many, there's one, but out of one, there will be none. And I don't know if there's a copyright protection on that. I doubt it because it's Cspan. So it's for public use, it's for personal use. And so we'll share and we'll see. Y'all have a great day.